Okay, so can you hear me with this? I'll look to the back of the room to see whether you think we should start or not. All right, the door closes, and so I think we're going to begin. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Evan Bloom. I'm with the Center for the Ocean and the Arctic here at UIT, and also with the German Marshall Fund, among a number of other places. And it is a real pleasure to be here and talk about the High Seas Treaty, the Treaty on Biodiversity Beyond National Jurisdiction. I was the U.S. head of delegation during the negotiation of the treaty for about 5 years. It was under negotiation for nearly 20 years, I think. But I wasn't there at the end. So when it comes to the late night, overnight, all of that kind of stuff, doing the final deal, I'm not the guy to ask about that. But I was there until the end of 2020 and watching the formation of what was and is one of the most exciting things going on in ocean governance. And now it is a treaty that's not only in development, but it is even been signed and entered into force. So this is really one of the biggest developments in high seas governance in decades, and at the forefront of the development of international law. And so it's also a key moment for international ocean conservation. So Vito is going to go into the details of what the treaty is, and of course, as you know, it applies to areas beyond national jurisdiction globally, but that means it applies to the high seas portion of the Central Arctic Ocean. So we have in effect, two panels for you. We couldn't fit up everybody on the dais up here, so we're going to do this in two sub-panels. And we'll begin with some initial thoughts from those who are on the stage. And after each panel, there will be some time for questions to the panelists. And before that, I'll probably ask some questions of them as well. I'm hoping that we can explore not only the opportunities that are offered by this new treaty, but also to try to get to understand what some of its limitations are, and to get a sense of how it is going to develop, how its related rules are going to develop over time. So with that, let me start by saying who is up here with me on the stage. Right now, it's Vito DeLucia, who is a professor at the Faculty of Law here at UIT and director of the Norwegian Center for the Law of the Sea. He teaches courses on international environmental law, law of the sea, comparative law and legal philosophy, and interdisciplinary legal methods. And he has long been doing important work on the BBNJ Treaty in particular. And Mary Lagernes-Tegen, she is advisor for the section for treaty law and environmental law at the Norwegian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and she has been the Norwegian lead for working on the details of the current rules of the BBNJ treaty. Next to me here is Vicki Lee Walgren. She has been working at WWF for over 20 years and is currently the director of WWF's Global Arctic Program, leading a core team of senior specialists and mobilizing the network to deliver on WWF's regional Arctic strategy. As such, she looks at the Arctic from nature's perspective and with a holistic view of the Arctic with all its varied, interconnected ecological and human dimensions. This is a lot, really.
Really long.
But yeah, but you gave that to me, so. Then there's Jan Gunnar Winter. He is the director of the Center for the Ocean and the Arctic at UIT, the Arctic University of Norway. He was recently pro-rector of UIT and previously director of the Norwegian Polar Institute from 2005 to 2017. So first we'll start with Vito to give us an overview of what this treaty is. And I think he has some slides as well. Thank you.
Yes, okay. Thank you, Evan. So I'm happy to be here and to give you a little overview about the BBNJ agreement, what it is, and very, very briefly, and also in which context it's coming to make and what impact that might be in the future. As mentioned by Evan, so the treaty's geographical scope of application is areas beyond national jurisdiction, and in the context of the Arctic that is represented in the map, it's the high seas portion of the Central Arctic Ocean. It also has competence to regulate activities in relation to the ocean floor, but once the ongoing processes of clarifying the entitlements of extended continental shelf on the part of Arctic coastal state will be completed, there will remain very little areas on the ocean floor which will be beyond national jurisdiction. But for precision, as a lawyer, I need to mention that. So the first, the key word of what I'm going to say is complexity. So the first thing is just to canvas briefly that there is a kind of political complexity in the Arctic that will welcome the new treaty and will, in many respects, delimit and allow its concrete impact. But more importantly is the law and governance complexity. So there is a very large number of existing instruments, frameworks, and bodies which are already operational from the International Maritime Organization to International Seabed Authority to regional fisheries management bodies to global treaties like this Convention on Biological Diversity, Convention on Migratory Species. It's a very long list. So this creates a lot of complexities for the BBNJ agreement to navigate, considering that its kind of mandate is precisely delimited vis-a-vis existing instrument framework and bodies, and I will explain in a second how. There are also regional bodies that are not entirely competent to regulate activities in the Arctic, but they have a small portion of their competence area that include the Central Arctic Ocean, or the high seas part. And particularly in the Northeast Atlantic, the OSPAR Convention regulate vessel source pollution, and the Northeast Atlantic Fisheries Commission. And you see the topmost yellow part is the little portion of the high seas and the Central Arctic Ocean, which is regulated by NEAFC. There is already a series of overlaps. This is the Central Arctic Ocean Fisheries Agreement, just to give you a sense that has a one-to-one match with the competence area of the BBNJ agreement. The Polar Code is also it's a specific set of rules governing shipping in polar areas, and this is the Arctic boundary of the scope of application. So there's a lot of overlap. So this is important to keep in mind when thinking about what are the potential implications of the treaty. But the treaty itself is complex enough. It's a long treaty. It's constituted of several parts, has 76 articles, about 62 pages, and 2 annexes. So there's a lot of stuff in the treaty. And it just entered into force. There's a lot of questions that in the treaty text remained open-ended in the sense that the text was agreed in terms of compromises that would need to be clarified as the implementation process begins. The substantive topics that the agreement covers are four, and there are marine genetic resources and the utilization or the benefits arising from their utilization. It's this part 2. Part 3 is about area-based management measures and marine protected areas. Part 4 is about environmental impact assessment, and then part 5 is about capacity building and the transfer of marine technology. I'll primarily focus on part 3 and 4 for the purpose of this presentation. The key contributions in the article, in the Arctic, can be summarized in a few key points. So the first, and maybe the initial thrust for even starting the negotiation was that the current legal framework, which is primarily hinging on the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, of which the BBNJ agreement is an implementation agreement, didn't have a formal legal basis for adopting marine protected areas in areas beyond national jurisdiction. There could be options to do that through regional management frameworks or sectoral, but there was not a legal basis that would allow the adoption or the designation of marine protected areas across all sectoral activities in areas beyond national jurisdiction. So this is the first key potential contribution that the BBNJ agreement brings to the regulatory and governance landscape, with some caveats. We'll see which ones. One of these measures is related to potential emergencies, which may be particularly relevant to the Arctic situation, given the complex and accelerated impacts of all planetary crises, the pollution, biodiversity, and climate. These emergency measures are envisioned to be able to address in an expedited manner cases where there's grave risk of environmental damage based on natural man-made disaster, and would sidestep the regular procedure either through the BBNJ process itself or in relation to other bodies that may have competence. The second set of key implications for the Arctic is the new rules of environmental impact assessment. And there are A rules that will apply to activities that take place in the Arctic, and there will be also air rules for activities that, or there are because they're already in force, air rules for activities that take place outside of the Arctic and may and also in areas within national jurisdiction and may have impacts on the Arctic A, B, and J. Another important function that the BBNJ agreement may be able to absolve is the coordination and cooperation, both with all this plethora of agreements that we've seen already exist and operate, but also facilitate cooperation among them. And this is one of the key problems that we international lawyers always complain about, the fragmentation. So there is an opportunity for this agreement to function as a hub to facilitate coordination and cooperation. And this is maybe specifically in relation to the Arctic, one of the points that I think may provide the biggest opportunity for a positive effect of the BBNJ agreement. And that's the provision on strategic environmental assessment, and specifically its letter 2, where the Conference of the Parties of the BBNJ agreement may, of its own initiative, develop a strategic environmental assessment for a particular region, and then other processes, EIA related to individual projects, but also maybe the establishment of certain measures based on area protection may need to take into account this strategic environmental assessment. The details of what this means are very unclear, and the authority of the BBNJ bodies in this respect is also not clear, but this would be one way in which the large marine ecosystems program of the PAIM could be operationalized through an agreement with authority to set rules and adopt measures. This is very briefly some of the key opportunities, but there's also some challenges. One is that there is indeed in the agreement a set of restrictions to its authority to adopt measures. So when the treaty establishes a legal basis, that legal basis is also delimited vis-a-vis the competence of all other instrument frameworks and bodies that may have competence to adopt measures with respect to individual activities, shipping, fishing, deep sea mining, you name it. And so the Conference of the Parties or the BBNG agreement may only adopt measures with full authority to establish restrictions where there's no other regulatory bodies with competence, and otherwise may recommend or facilitate these bodies to adopt measures themselves. And so this is one first restriction that delimits the scope of its potential contributions. Another one is specific to the Arctic, who will be a member of the BBNJ agreement. The Russian Federation hasn't signed and will not foreseeably do that at a later stage. The United States has signed, but it's unlikely to ratify the treaty. So this poses a challenge when the two biggest, maybe two big actors in the Arctic are not on board. And the new Arctic geopolitics, which of course makes everything more complex, and so this will be possibly a contingent, hopefully contingent, a short situation, but it may pose a lot of challenges. So that was it. I'm actually 8 seconds ahead.
Wow, that is very impressive. Well done, Vito. Thank you very much. And what you can see from that is this is a very complex, detailed treaty. So it's not going to be a quiz based upon what you've just heard. But I'd like to ask, in sort of talking about the technicalities of all of this, during the negotiations, not all of the details could be worked through. And as a result, number of issues were punted into the future. And so you have a situation where a lot of work is going to have to be done by the Conference of Parties and others over the coming years. And we've seen, with respect to the International Seabed Authority, for example, that it can take decades to work through the details of these sorts of things. So as you look at some of the open areas that are going to be key here, are there any that you'd like to point to as being particularly deserving of attention or problematic?
So, yeah, so maybe the one thing that I can point immediately is that so at the moment there is an ongoing process, which Marie will be more informed than me in the details, to streamline the implementation, and that will, among other things, provide a basis for the first Conference of the Parties to adopt the rules of procedure of the body, set them up, financial mechanisms. These are all like less fancy things that, however, are crucial for the operation of a treaty. So this is the first point, is to really prepare for the implementation by establishing rules. And there's a lot of very nerdy, complex questions related to these rules, from voting procedure, for proxy voting, for digital voting abilities that will have a significant impact on the way that these bodies will work and that their ability to efficiently carry out their mandate. A second thing is then once this body are set up, in particular Conference of the Party, but also the scientific and technical body, there are a lot of details that these bodies will need to set out, including standards and guidelines for environmental impact assessment, for strategic environmental assessment that will have a crucial impact on how this will actually play out in the reality of the day-to-day. So implementation, I think, is key, and this initial process, which, as you say, may take many years, still, I think, will be fundamental for determining how then the mandate of this body will actually be exercised. And in that respect, again, the membership will also be crucial in terms of establishing these rules and also the execution of the mandate. So I think it's a mix between establishing the legal rules, but also effectivizing the processes through which these bodies will including their composition, will operate.
Great. Well, thank you very much. Well, Marie, can I turn the floor over to you and give us a sense of what the government of Norway is thinking about when it comes to this major new treaty? Thank you.
Thank you. And just commenting on what Vito just said, certainly it's heavy duty work in terms of implementation right now going on in the PrepCom process. And it's become very evident that even though we managed to finalize something, we certainly did not finalize everything. And we at least, and I think it's a common sensation that we feel like we are fighting battles we thought we were done fighting currently. I think that's the same for all sides. But it's very fun to be at the UN. So when this treaty was adopted and when all the news flashed through, a Norwegian or like an international media outlet coined it the most important treaty nobody knows anything about. And for the negotiation team, we were a bit disappointed. We thought, okay, we've spent 20 years on this, and this is the headline we're getting. I guess it's certainly not true for the people in this room, but it's certainly a very complex instrument. It has vast possibilities, and it deserves to be championed. And Norway was very happy to ratify early and be amongst the 60 countries who pushed it over into entry into force, which was a great ambition for us. But on the flip side of that, for us parties, it reinforces and clarifies our responsibilities to protect and preserve the marine environment according to UNCLOS. And I'm happy to be here to discuss both the possibilities, but also the responsibilities that we as party has taken on in ratifying the agreement. So I'm going to try to comment on the interrelationship between the BBNJ and the Arctic region from a Norwegian perspective. Certainly, in the Arctic, the BBNJ comes into a region where already an extensive international legal framework apply. And I think Vito illustrated this very well. We have multiple regional organizations. We have fisheries management, we have environmental protection, and we have arenas for regional cooperation between the Arctic states, such as the Arctic Council. And at the same time, it is a region where interest is peaking, certainly in the last couple of weeks, but it has also been growing over time as the reality of the planetary crisis is registering. And it has its implications. This will increase activity in the region, which in turn will lead to greater pressures on the environment and its resources, but which should also lead to a greater sense of environmental responsibility. And this is especially true for the Arctic countries. So 2 topics that we as Norway are considering going forward for the Arctic region. Firstly, implications for the region and the question of cooperation in practice. So a cornerstone of the BBNJ agreement is that it provides for increased cooperation. And this both means that it provides an arena for cooperation between countries, and more importantly, through strengthening the cooperation between organizations and among them, and gathering information which will inform the COP. And this is very much a gap-filling exercise, and one of the reasons why this treaty was thought to be necessary, that we had a lot of different organizations fulfilling different mandates, overlapping sometimes, leaving gap somewhere else, and we want to have this integration of the ocean management. So how can we maximize the potential of the agreement without leaving the existing organizations behind, which was a premise for the agreement, but which we think will be difficult in practice? We are wondering how the different organizations will be set up to respond to and to meaningfully contribute to the BBNJ processes. We are considering how the not undermine clause will play out, because different actors will have different opinions about whether something is a question of competence or if it's an evaluation of efficiency. And what happens if we have a regional organization who wants to introduce a measure, but either the process is too slow or it's not encompassing enough, and what will that lead to in relation to the BBNJ COP? And the third thing I thought about is state consistency. And states are notoriously inconsistent. We have a lot of different views we are portraying across different organizations. And it is an obligation after the agreement to further the purposes of the agreement across. So we essentially have to be champions of this agreement across all the different organizations in which we participate. I'm interested to see how that will happen. I, for one, can talk about how different internal coordination can be, and sometimes I wonder if the most difficult coordination process will be amongst the different Norwegian ministries, because we have different viewpoints and we have different opinions, and that will be true for all different countries. So that will take place within each country, within a region, and also on the global level. And how we will have one joined Norwegian voice, which is consistent and which is furthering the same purposes, is something we are very much wanting to do, but it's going to be a struggle for us as well. So for us, it's vital that we're striking a balance to safeguard what is already working well, but filling in the gaps where improvement are needed and possible. And the second point is, how are we going to ensure regional buy-in for the Arctic, which will be vital for the success of the agreement in this region? So the Arctic states have a particular responsibility related to the Arctic marine environment. Currently, only 4 out of 8 Arctic states have ratified. And if we focus on the central Arctic Ocean, only 2 out of 5 coastal states have ratified, with the Kingdom of Denmark in a particular position. And that is not surprising, but it's certainly not in the best interest of the agreement. Admittedly, we are in areas beyond national jurisdiction, and it will be the responsibility of all parties who frequent the region to adhere to any potential measure, such as an MPA. But at the same time, regional buy-in will be vital for the success of the agreement in the Arctic. And if the biggest users of the ocean in the region won't join, it will clearly impact the success of the treaty in the region, which is true for any region, as for the Arctic. And as Vito said, with the current state of the world, that is not likely to change anytime soon. So if an MPA is introduced, depending on who introduces it and what kind of measures it entails, who will be there to respect it? Norway certainly wants to be one of the countries who champions such proposals, but I think we stand at a crossroads in terms of which kind of alleyway are we going to go down to ensure the best ocean management. And I think it's important to work on all levels and to utilize both existing forums and all channels of communications which we have, but at the same time trying to utilize this agreement and benefiting from all the new measures that it provides to us. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those comments. It's really helpful, especially your thinking about the regional circumstances that we find ourselves in. Also, I want to say that when you say that the hardest thing you face is the disagreement among Norwegian agencies, we in the U.S. feel the same thing about dealing with the U.S. interagency. So I totally understand where you're coming from. But let me go back. I think you provide a crucial perspective here because that you represent your government here. And that is when you have Russia, which has was opposing the negotiations all along, and the U.S., which has kind of switched positions, and there is, I assume, no prospect for this administration to become a party to the agreement. How does Norway maneuver in that sort of situation? How can the treaty be a success for the Arctic if 2 major coastal states are not in the game, perhaps for a long time or maybe forever?
That is a horrible question to be asked.
Sorry.
That's fine. But I think that certainly we notice the shift in the administration, and we very much benefited from the US in the treaty negotiations. And I think with 2 major players out of the PrEPCom, out of the sort of discussions, it leaves a vacuum. And the remaining countries are trying to fill that vacuum. That creates new power dynamics. So I think certainly in the UN, it's very evident that all different parties are sort of considering what is their right move, because the power dynamic has shifted and new powers are emerging. We have changing governments. So that leads to sort of, it's a bit more difficult to predict outcomes and also positions, and that can lead to misunderstandings, or it can put new partners in your way. So it's quite interesting to see, but it's definitely not in the interest of integrated ocean management. And then for this region, I think it's obviously the treaty only binds the parties to it, but it's going to be interesting if there is a proposal and which has certain measures, and whether or not it will be respected, although it's not binding, or if it's going to be overlooked as something that a group of countries want to do to have a high ambition, but which has no effect. So I really believe that we have to utilize the channels of communication and cooperation which we already have, where we have established relationships and arenas to discuss. But it's difficult if the other countries do not want to be at the table.
Thank you very much. I mean, one of the things we may want to discuss at some point is how China has now stepped forward to offer itself to be the host country for the Secretariat, which creates an interesting dynamic in terms of new partners to work with. So, anyway, moving right along, I'd like to ask Jan Gunnar Winter to talk a little bit about, I guess, regulatory frameworks in the Norwegian context and how it relates to BBNJ. So, all to you.
Thank you, Evan. I will take us now to the domestic Norwegian waters as I'm leaving the high seas, and give a very, very overall description of the regulatory frameworks and principles for ocean management in Norway as a backdrop for this panel, but also for the next panel. First, we have an integrated approach in Norway when it comes to ocean management, which means that we are crossing all sectors, and we have an ecosystem-based core, so there is no wealthy ocean without a healthy one, and knowledge-based in the sense that science and research and updates of knowledge and information should be kind of a basement, so integrated ecosystem-based and knowledge-based. It should balance the value creation, the business side with the sustainable use. That's also a kind of a core principle. You could say to a journalist, balancing economy and ecology, but it should also balance other things like traditional industries with new ones like offshore wind, and there are others. A key component in these principles is the identification of what we call the particularly valuable and vulnerable areas in Norwegian SVOs. That is regions of high biodiversity importance, and they should guide how activities should find its place. So if you look at the map for the Norwegian waters, you will see that it's a patchwork of colors, because there are priorities to this activity in this part of the year, another activity, and it's a lot of things that are balanced against each other. Now, what I described now was our ocean management outside 1 nautical mile from the grounding line. So that's in the open water. We have a very uniform integrated ocean management in these waters. They are updated roughly every 4th year with new knowledge, science, and so on. But these plans are politically overarching guidance. And it's very important, and I think that goes back to Maria's comment, that the laws and regulations are sector-based. So there is laws for aquaculture, for fisheries, for oil and gas, and so on, and there the sector interest is, in a way, potentially trumping the more political framework this ocean management is built on. Now, I said 1 nautical mile outside the grounding line, so in the coastal zone, which is huge in Norway, it's about 1/3 of the mainland area. We have a totally different kind of framework. It's the so-called Planning and Building Act. This is a municipality level, so it's each municipality that makes the priorities for how to use the ocean space. And again, using the patchwork thing, now it's very different along the coastline with the different municipalities given different priorities. To, for example, prioritize one activity in one municipality while another one in the neighboring one. So that's 2 different kind of zones, if you wish, the coastal zone and the more open sea zone. And then briefly at the end, we have last year revised our Marine Environmental Act, which gives us the potential for conservation measures in Norwegian waters from 12 to 200 nautical miles. That's a quite important milestone. And the year before, in 2024, the government laid out principles and strategies for so-called marine industrial plans. So that's our principles there, for example. Coexistence is one kind of strategic priority and a principle, and 9 others. There are 10 of these principles laid out. So that's in short how it looks in the Norwegian waters. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jan Gunnar. I wonder if I could ask you briefly about, so Norway is signed on to 30 by 30, the idea of protecting 30% of the ocean by 2030, and this follows from the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. But 30 by 30 is also deeply connected to BBNJ. So in your sense of things, how do those things relate? How far has Norway gotten in terms of moving towards implementation of 30 by 30?
Thank you for that question. I say the same as Maria. Well, I think in general, conservation, both kind of focus and measures have been stronger at land than at sea in Norway. And when it comes to conservation measures or MPAs or similar in the ocean space, what I hear when I'm traveling around in meetings and so on is that the area, the percentage of protected area in Norwegian waters differs quite a lot depending on who is speaking, because there is not one way of measuring this. But if you, I think, take the kind of sum of what the people and different organizations argue, I think we are way behind 30 by 30 ambition at this point, like many other countries, and hopefully not offending nobody and not the Norwegian government. But I think there is a great ambition. We are committed to that internationally, and we have national plans for adhering to that commitment, but it's a lot of work to do, actually. There is often mentioning of that we have a protection around 5% of Norwegian waters. So that gives an indication. I don't say that's the truth and the only number, but that gives an indication.
Great, thank you very much. That's helpful. So I'd like to turn to Vicky now to talk about the NGO perspective, which I think is particularly important in the context of this treaty, because this is something that there was very strong NGO involvement in the negotiation and creation of the treaty. So in any event, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm trying to figure out where to start off with. I wanted us to just take a moment to stop to think about what we're talking about here, right? We're talking about the high seas, and specifically in the Arctic. We're talking about the Central Arctic Ocean, right? And what the possibilities are thanks to the new High Seas Treaty. Because it's a global treaty, right? Across all of that 60% that you were talking about, Vito. But the Central Arctic Ocean is not like other oceans, right? The Central Arctic Ocean, it's the only ocean of ice that we have on the planet. And as such, it is a place where we have not been able to go to all of this time. The other oceans around the world have been trafficked, have been accessible to people. The Arctic Ocean has not. And as we all know, it is becoming that. So what we have is a situation where all of these threats, all of these activities, it's not a question of when they're going to be coming to the Arctic Ocean. They are going to be coming. The question is, are we going to be ready to be able to manage them? And this is where, to me, the High Seas Treaty becomes such an interesting opportunity for this. I completely agree with all, all of those opportunities that you listed there, Vito, that the High Seas Treaty can bring to us. But I also agree with all of the challenges that you are raising as well. How is this going to work? But the point is, this is our chance, guys, to get it right before we enter in. And it's so many of these ones. And I think that for me, one of the big ones, obviously there's the area-based management tools. Obviously there's those ones. They're the 30 by 30. That's obvious. But for me, with the Central Arctic Ocean, it is again about the governance complexity, Vito, that you were showing with all of those maps, right? How do we make that work across these? Many of those are uni-sectoral. How do we get them to talk? How do we get to talk across sectors? We have two in the same sector with CALFA and NIAF. How are these ones all how are we talking together with them? We have a chance to try to do that. And I have great hopes for what BB&J could be, but as we heard, there's a lot of questions as to what's actually going to be happening. But what I do think that is already happening, thanks to the High Seas Treaty, are dialogues like this, right? And getting us already thinking about how is this going to look like, what are we going to be doing, et cetera, et cetera. So, at the very least, it started us doing that. But obviously, the potential and what we need is so much more than that in order for us to be able to manage this unique ocean to the changes that are coming there.
Okay, thank you very much. So what I'd like to ask in this context is, as the NGO community thinks about the Central Arctic Ocean and what needs to be done, and taking into account the fact that there has been perhaps less human interaction with this ocean than some other places on the planet, what really needs to be done? When you think about what needs to be protected or addressed, what rises to the top of that list for the NGO community?
Okay, I can't talk for the NGO community in its entirety.
You said you talked for nature.
Well, that's only one part of NGOs. That's what I was going to say. I can speak from a nature perspective and that one, but I can't talk for all NGOs, Evan.
I understand.
As great as I think I am, I don't think it's wise for me to do that.
I totally get it. I'm just giving you a hard time.
But if I go at it from a nature perspective, and this is my big thing when it comes to 30 by 30 in general, right? We're talking about 30% of the world by 2030. But it's not just any 30%. It's got to be the right 30%. And that 30%, that the representativity that's needed across that, we need to be thinking about the connectivity across these. It's really about that diversity and making sure that we have the right 30%. So for me, that's the answer in terms of what are we talking about when we're thinking about the Central Arctic Ocean, right? And looking at what are those specific important conservation features and what do they look like across the Central Arctic Ocean and acknowledging that the Central Arctic Ocean is very intimately connected with the parts of the Arctic Ocean that's in national jurisdictions as well, connected to the marginal zones, to the coastal zones, and seeing that entire connectivity and that one ocean. And then if we want to get even bigger, then how that's even connected to other oceans as well. But I mean, that's the parts that I think that we really need to be thinking about, right? It's not just anything. It's not that there are specific features, there are specific things that we need to be thinking about to ensure that we are able to maintain the ecological functioning, honestly, of that ocean.
Great, thank you very much. So what I'd like to do at this point is open up for some questions. Not a lot of questions, because we need to get to the second panel of our sub-panels here. But so if I think that there's going to be a microphone that'll come from the back. So Dave Bolton, please.
Okay. Thanks very much. I don't know, is this working?
It is.
Okay. Thanks very much, all panelists. Actually, I have a follow-up question for Maria based on something Evan already asked you. If I understood what you're saying, if there were, through the BB&J COP, some sort of area-based management tool for the Arctic proposed, without some kind of buy-in or support from Russia and the United States, as a practical matter, you have your doubts about whether that could really work. And I want to push on that a little bit, because in principle, the agreement is about areas beyond any country's national jurisdiction. No one country has any greater claim to it. If what you're saying is so, you're basically giving a veto, to one or more coastal states over an area like this, and that doesn't sound right to me. I do understand about the political dynamics, but at least as a legal matter, it should be able to proceed without coastal states who aren't even party to the agreement coming along. What am I missing here?
You're not missing anything. I totally agree with your legal analysis. What I was trying to say was, obviously we're in the ABNJ, and there is no non-party that can block any sort of agreement. What I was getting at was, we as parties to the agreement can absolutely, if we have the right percentages of votes, create an MPA. Then the question is, what if we create an MPA and it is not respected by countries in terms of violating the measures, is what I'm talking about. For example, that was my point. And that was just a matter of saying we would ideally, as for UNCLOS, have some sort of universality to the treaty where we're capturing everybody and saying we agree on this as a minimum standard for how we countries engage with the ocean. So, but I totally agree, non-parties cannot block the adoption of measures, and if the majority of parties to the BB&J wants to introduce an MPA in the Arctic, they can certainly not block it. It was more of a question of implementation, so I agree with you.
Yeah, please.
To me, this is the situation with any global agreement. Right? In any global agreement, if there's any country that doesn't sign, they can just say, yeah, whatever, I'm going to do my own thing, right? So, I mean, that's the case with anything. For me, I'm thinking that the High Seas Treaty has the potential, again, of being stronger than that because of the need to coordinate with the different IFBs. And they've been signed on by different ones, right? So I think that in that respect, if you are able to get that coordination, the BB&J, again, has the potential to be even stronger than many of these other global agreements.
Dave, this is one of the, I think what all of you are talking about is one of the more interesting questions of this whole regime, and was something that during the negotiations was something that was focused on and talked about certainly on the margins, because of this balance between, if you have, I don't know, Guatemala thinks that there should be increased protections in the Arctic, but the Arctic coastal states kind of don't agree. What if Norway doesn't think it's a good plan or whatever it is, but it's forced through on the basis of some sort of votes? What does that really mean in terms of effective action? On the other hand, as you suggest, if one or two coastal states aren't quite with it. It is an area beyond national jurisdiction. That's the heart of the legal point. So it's really fascinating stuff. So another question, please. Behind Dave, yes. I see a hand.
I have a question for Vito. You mentioned in the beginning that under the BBNG there's also a clause that allows for emergency measures in the face of man-made disaster. Could you elaborate on that, like what that could look like?
It's on, yes. There's not much to elaborate. I mean, the article, the provision for that is quite long, but there's a lot of context, and there's a lot of things that will lead to that need to be elaborated in an implementation phase. For example, there is provision for consultations, but the length and content of consultation is not structured. There are also questions as to whether and to which extent some of the general provisions of the agreement will apply to the provision of emergency measures, which is structured as an exception to the standard process. But the key is really that this should cater for a situation in which either the normal process under the BBNG agreement for adopting measures or the processes under other bodies that may have competence to regulate an activity or a region may not be sufficiently expeditious to address the emergency. And so there is this provision that allows these measures to be adopted in a more streamlined, through a more streamlined process with a time limit of 2 years. And if there are certain conditions, being one is the type of damage and the other is the fact that there's to be necessary measures to address the issue, and then there's to be these consultations with other frameworks and bodies that may have competence in that respect. There is also other caveats. So, but much of that remains still to be understood how it's going to work. But it provides this. I mean, in a way, the Arctic it's in a constant state of emergency, so that will be the prime candidate for a pan-Arctic area based on this emergency provision. Yeah. So, but
Maybe one more question, if there is one. Yeah, please.
From the seas at risk. And of course, Norway put a pause on the deep sea minerals mining till 2029. And I was wondering what effect will the BBNJ have on this pause and what will happen after 2029?
Guess that's for me. So you're correct. There's a pause on the developing, or sort of we were in the process of opening the continental shelf, and that process has been paused, and that was due to sort of a budgetary agreement in Norway. So it's paused for the length of this period, essentially. So it ends in 2029. To the question of what happens next, I would say that's a question for our politicians. But for sure, it is a delicate question for Norway as a big ocean state with considerable ambition, both on the conservation side, but which at the same time we are a big user of the ocean. So it's definitely a complicated one for us. And when it comes to the question of how will this agreement impact on that, I think that would really depend. What I can say is that when we ratified the agreement and when we were looking at the environmental impact assessment clause, we were all the time thinking in terms of the activities you do in your own jurisdiction which can impact in areas beyond jurisdiction. And that is certainly something that when or if this is ever sort of put into effect, will be integrated into those kind of regulations if it's decided that it will go forward. But whether or not it will go forward, I really couldn't tell you.
Well, thank you very much. I think now we'll take 3 new panelists to the stage and we'll continue. All right, so we have 3 new panelists. I will introduce them. Shigeki Takaya is a senior research fellow with the Sasakawa Peace Foundation. He previously served for many years with Japan's Ministry of Agriculture, Forestry, and Fisheries, where he worked extensively on international fisheries policy, fisheries management and enforcement, and whaling policy. And Linda Solstrand-Dahlberg is the head of the Brussels office for UIT. Before taking on this role, she worked with Arctic policy for the Norwegian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and prior to that, with science and Arctic policy for the British Foreign Office. Originally a neuroscientist, Linda pursued a career in academia at several international institutions before making the leap to policy. And to my left, my friend Alf Håkon Hoel is a political scientist who writes and teaches international fisheries policy at the Norwegian College of Fisheries Science at the UIT. He has written extensively on global and regional oceans and fisheries issues, and in particular on the Arctic. He has worked in the Norwegian Foreign Service and was involved in the development of what is called the Central Arctic Ocean Fisheries Agreement. So we start with Mr. Takaya. Takaya-san, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak these sessions. And my name is Shigeki Takaya from the Sasakawa Peace Foundation. I previously worked for many years at the Fisheries Agency of the government of Japan, where I was involved in the fisheries policy, including international agreements. Today, I would like to offer an overview of the international discussion surrounding the BBNJ agreement, its relationship with fisheries, and the Central Arctic Ocean Fisheries Agreements, drawing on the perspectives that the Japanese government has taken so far. Please note this presentation does not represent the official position of the Japanese government, but reflects my personal views. My aim is to provide a shared foundation of understanding for the panel discussion that will follow. As you know, the BBNJ agreement was agreed at the United Nations in 2023. Its objective is conservation and sustainable use of marine biological diversity in the area beyond the national jurisdiction, namely the high seas and deep sea beds. What is important to emphasize is that the BBNJ agreement is an extension of the existing international law of the sea framework rather than the departure from it. It is positioned as the third implementing agreement under the UNCLOS, following the 1994 agreement on the implementation of the panel, Part 11 and the 1995 UN Fish Stock Agreement. Negotiation on the BBNJ began in 2004 and took almost 20 years to conclude. This lengthy process reflects the fact that international community was required to reconcile several fundamental values. First, the relationship between the freedom of the high seas guaranteed under the UNCLOS and the need of new international rules. Second, balance between biodiversity conservation and sustainable use. Third, the relationship between the new agreement and the existing international institutions, particularly regional fisheries management organization, RFMOs. None of these issues could be resolved through the simple choice of the agreement or opposition. During the negotiation process, a number of legitimate concerns were raised, particularly by the fishing nation and country activity in research and development. For example, there were concerns that BBNJ could become in the practice a new framework for fisheries regulations. That's the establishment of marine protected areas on the high sea. could have unilateral impact on the fishing activities, or that decision-making within the conference of the parties might disadvantage certain countries. Rather than distancing itself, because of those concerns, the Japanese government chose the approach of the deep engagement precisely because such concern existed. At this point, I would like to introduce the perspective the Japanese government has consistently taken regarding the relationship between the BBNJ and the fisheries. Of course, the BBNJ agreement is not agreement that directly regulates fisheries. Japan has consistently maintained the fisheries management should be addressed through the RFMOs, which process region-specific scientific knowledge and operation experience. This principle is reflected in the institutional design of BBNJ itself. The agreement contains no provision on the setting of a catch limit or operational fishing rules. At the same time, concerns have been expressed about the potential impacts of marine protected areas introduced under the BBNJ. In response, the agreement established a careful multi-step decision-making process, including proposal by the state parties, scientific and technical assessments, consultation with the relevant bodies, including RFMOs, and final decision by the conference of the parties. In addition, the Japanese government has clearly stated the parliamentary discussions that alongside the scientific evidence, socioeconomic impacts, including the impact on fisheries, must be considered. In addition to intergovernmental discussion, it is also important to consider views expressed by the international fisheries organizations. In March 2023, immediately following the agreement on BBNJ text, the International Coalition of the Fisheries Association, ICFA, issued a statement welcoming the adoption of the new agreement. ICFA described the BBNJ agreement as the culmination of 20 years of the work under the UNCLOS and positively assessed the fact that it respects the existing fisheries management achievements, particularly the role of the mandate of RFMOs. At the same time, ICFA and Japanese fisheries stakeholders have also shared concern about the potential risk at the implementation stage. At the recent ICFA-FAO exchange meeting at the representative of Japanese fisheries organization pointed out that because many BBNJ parties are non-fishing countries, there is a risk that high-seas fisheries could in the future be unduly constrained by the misunderstanding or prejudice in a manner similar to what has sometimes occurred under CITES. Concerns were also expressed that if RFMO management measures are not adequate to take into account, decisions adopted by the majority voting could effectively disregard agreed fisheries management framework. In addition, because BBNJ meeting government-led, there are concerns that fisheries expertise may not be sufficiently reflected in implementation. In response, Dr. Manuel Baranch, FAO Assistant Director General for Fisheries and Aquaculture, emphasized that it is essential for fishing nations to engage activity in BBNJ process and to contribute scientific information and management experience from the RFMO side in order to jointly build a practical and workable institutional framework. He also confirmed FAO's intention to remain the activity involved in the implementation of the BBNJ agreement. Building on the perspectives, I would also like to briefly highlight the role of FAO. FAO provides guidance and advice to help the fisheries sector probably understand the BBNG agreement and engage constructively in the implementation and reactive discussion. In particular, FAO's expertise is crucial in clarifying how RFMO and national fisheries authorities can be should interest with the BBNG process. This approach is also consistent with the Japanese position under the Central Arctic Ocean Fisheries Agreement. That agreement adopted the precautionary approach by preventing the commercial fishing in the absence of the sufficient scientific knowledge, while envisaging the establishment of RFMO for future management. In other words, even if newly accessible areas, the principle that the fisheries should be managed through the RFMO remain unchanged. Japanese government views the BBNG agreement not as a framework to be assessed from the outside, but one in which it should engage from the within the assumed responsibility for future rulemaking. I personally consider this approach is reasonable, as it is contribute to biodiversity conservation, the maintenance and protection of marine interests, and the development of an ocean order based on the rule of law. In this presentation, I have sought to organize a discussion on the BBNJ fisheries and Arctic not as a matter of confrontation, but as an issue of institutional role and complementarity. I hope that the panel discussion which follows will explore in a concern and constructive manner, a concrete and constructive manner, how the BBNG agreement can be harmonized with diverse forms of the ocean use, including fisheries. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I recognize that you are not here representing the Japanese government, but I wonder if I could ask you to speculate on possible Japanese interests in relation to this topic. In particular, you point out that the BBNJ agreement does not directly regulate fisheries, but of course the overall intent in terms of conservation would have the effect of reducing fishing or dealing with overfishing, those sort of issues. So I wonder, particularly in the context of the Arctic, whether Japan has any particular expectations when it comes to implementation of this treaty in the Arctic context.
Of course, Japanese government has we don't have a will to start fishing the Arctic areas. But basically, Japanese government and Japanese fishermen hope and wanted to control fishery stock under the scientific and the and rule of the law. So the some convention and some meetings like CITES, it's not so the not the scientific evidence and only the emotionals. So we request to the Arctic and the under the BBNG controls, it needs scientific evidence and scientific controls. And the RFMO for the fishery sector, they have a faculty and the role of the fishery resource management. Of course, in Arctic there's no RFMOs, but we like to request if anyone starts the fisheries at the Arctic, it should be under the RFMO's control.
Thank you very much. So, Linda, you come all the way from Brussels, so you can tell us what's going on in that interesting place. What are they thinking about BBNJ?
Okay, I'll do my best. Unfortunately, we don't have anyone from the EU institutions represented here, but I do try to follow policy development from Brussels as close as possible. So I'll try to connect their efforts to the BBNJ and the BBNJ in the Arctic specifically. So as many of you know, the EU has quite a comprehensive portfolio when it comes to ocean initiatives. Everything from the big European Ocean Pact that was launched last year, which is a quite comprehensive structural framework of all the ocean activities and actions that the EU are doing, to Marine Strategy Framework Directive, which has environmental protection at its core, to the forthcoming European Ocean Act and the European Research and Innovation Strategy that's also in the making right now. That's just to mention a few. Of course, there are so many other initiatives that I could mention, including, you know, the Common Fisheries Policy. Of course, these initiatives, they're focusing on the national jurisdiction, and, you know, fisheries is not a part of the BBNJ either. But what they do have in common is a focus on science, on policy, on innovation, that we could learn something from and use to guide how we implement the BBNJ treaty. And specifically from the Common Fisheries Policy, you know, it's not a part of the BBNJ, but it is a part of the EU's strategy for the BBNJ on the implementation. You can learn from how they've worked cross-sectorally in that, and also that all of these initiatives that I mentioned are also science-based. So those are kind of mutually reinforcing the objectives with the BBNJ treaty. And it builds on these long-standing efforts to implement and create marine protected areas, using environmental impact assessments and working with ecosystem-based management, like Vito was touching on before. I also want to focus, though, a little bit on ocean science that the EU are strongly pushing for, and how their contributions to ocean knowledge systems, because they have some very key initiatives that, you know, member states participate in, but also associated countries such as Norway. And one of them is, of course, the upcoming Ocean Research and Innovation Strategy that's in the making now, that will align research, data, and innovation. It integrates science into policy making, and it also contributes more long-term to the knowledge systems that we need to govern our oceans in the future. And then specifically on the data, because we need data in order to implement science-based policy, of course. EMODNet, which is the European Marine Observation and Data Network, as well as Copernicus Marine Observation, are two big observation efforts, also using Earth observation, that kind of combines data in an open and interoperable manner, and supporting, you know, the BBNJ efforts into having shared data, equitable access to data to really implement the MPAs and conducting the impact assessments. So lastly, I also want to just mention the digital twin of the oceans, which is a monumental initiative focusing on exactly that, creating a digital twin of the oceans that provides an opportunity to conduct very advanced models of ocean scenarios and predict what could happen in different parameter variabilities. Really, all of this creates a scientific backbone that one could use in the implementation of BBNJ, also outside, well, of course, outside of the EU's mandate. But it's really supporting and aligning with the pillars of the BBNJ treaty. I think it's important to mention as well the political support that the BBNJ has from the EU, because they've been involved from the start, and they worked for fast ratification. They ratified, as a union in May last year, but they've also pushed member states to ratify it. So 16 out of 27 member states have ratified the treaty right now, and there is even a directive, a BBNJ implementation directive, that has been proposed by the Commission, has been adopted by the Parliament in November, but it's now stuck with the Council. And that kind of points to the issues around different member states having to be aligned and wanting to implement the treaty. And so maybe we'll come back to the concerns later, but I think that's going to be a difficult one to target. The EU, though, as a whole, is also co-chairing a high-ambition coalition with the Seychelles and Palau, which works for early ratification and implementation of the treaty, and highly focus on especially low-income countries or developing countries, and providing resources and capabilities for them to implement the treaty as well. So I think there's some political will and ambition to make a global commitment to multilateralism when it comes to implementation is key from the EU. And then also, of course, the scientific collaboration that I was touching on. Those are some of the key deliverables. And importantly, this is all being supported by funding.
So, Linda, thank you very much. My experience in dealing with the EU with respect to the treaty is that there is lots of enthusiasm and lots of energy within the EU in favor of the treaty. I was wondering whether in your discussions with EU member states or with the Commission, do they talk about the Arctic as an area of focus for the treaty? What is their thinking of the connection to the Arctic?
Yeah, that's a key issue, and certainly a key topic right now in the last 4 weeks. They are, at the moment, updating their Arctic policy, which I'm sure many of you are aware of. And it's certainly linked because they do already have these research programs, for instance, that conduct research in the Arctic. They're actually, at the moment, the biggest funder of Arctic research after reprioritization in the U.S. administration, should we say? So that makes them really a Arctic powerhouse in a sense, but they're not using that very strategically. They're also with the member states, they're the globally largest funder into high seas. So combined, I think they could have a strategic impact when it comes to how one can implement the BBNJ in the Arctic. It's a focus on multilateralism that is key for them, and that's something that I think we should all kind of acknowledge and welcome.
Great. Well, thank you very much. So, finally, Alf Håkon, your thoughts, particularly on fisheries issues and perhaps the relationship to the process related to the Central Arctic Ocean Fisheries Agreement.
Thank you. I will start out by pointing out that what we're talking about is a global treaty, and it applies to an enormous ocean area. And the world total landing of fisheries is about 80 million tons. Only 5 of those 80 million come from the high seas. So to put it in perspective, maybe the more important areas in terms of sustainability and improving fisheries management, that's inside national jurisdiction. This is a special case. As you can recall from the beautiful maps Vito showed us, there are 5 high seas areas in the Arctic, and there is 1 in the Central Arctic Ocean. There is no prospect of commercial fisheries arriving in that area in the foreseeable future. Basically because the area is ice covered most of the year and is likely to remain ice covered at least part of the year for the foreseeable future. And it has a very low primary productivity. So the prospect of large-scale commercial fisheries taking place in the Central Arctic Ocean, they are very slim indeed. It's a huge area, 2.8 million square kilometers. That's more than the Mediterranean. And so it's a very large area we are talking about here. The BBNJ Treaty is really a landmark agreement in the sense that it comes in a succession of significant developments in the global framework for the conservation and management of the oceans. Starting late 1950s, moving on during the 1970s and concluding with the Law of the Sea Convention in 1982, the Constitution of the Oceans. And then in 1994, we got an implementing agreement for seabed minerals. In 1995, we got an implementing agreement for fisheries. And now this is the 3rd implementing agreement. And it's way more complicated than the other ones. It's really 4 treaties into one, dealing with the different issue areas that we have heard about. Above the Arctic Circle, there are 5 or 6 bodies dealing with the management of fisheries in one sense or another. CAIOFA is not one of those. It's an agreement about not to fish. So it's not a fisheries agreement. It's an agreement about not to fish. So it's very different from other RFMOs. It was negotiated over a number of years. I remember the first meeting I participated in was in the margins of a fisheries committee meeting in FAO in Rome, called by Dave, sitting here. And from then on, there was a number of meetings up to this day. Actually, while we are here, there is a meeting in CAIOFA in Rome about some technical issues. What I think is important to bring up in the context of cooperation with the BBNJ is that this is a heavily science-based effort. The main business of CAIOFA today is about marine science. That's sort of what it's doing, mostly. And there is a scientific coordinating group meeting twice a year, and a lot of good work has been done. And it's important to point out that there are also other scientific efforts in the Central Arctic Ocean. For example, the project on integrated ecosystem management, a project between the International Council for the Exploration of the Sea, its sister body in the North Pacific, and the Arctic Council Working Group, PAIM. And these things are really tightly connected. So when thinking about how could the BBNJ engage with CAUFA, I think it is it has to be about scientific work. That's where the beef is, where there is concrete things to cooperate about. And the big question is where and how could the BBNJ make a difference to what is already ongoing in terms of the scientific work? I don't have an answer to it, but I think it is a two-way thing. It's a dialogue more than one or the other taking the sort of lead in the. Yeah, I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, we only have about 5 minutes left, but a quick question to you, Alfaken, is do you see any prospects of the development of an area-based management tool based on what you see and your crystal ball for all of this, under the BBNJ system?
You mean globally?
Well, one for the Arctic.
Well, I don't know, but certainly was referred to earlier today. There is a global goal of 30 by 30, and you could foresee that a area-based management tool, be it an OECM or an MPA in the Arctic, could contribute towards that goal. But again, I don't know. Yeah.
Thank you very much. So, a quick question or two from the audience. Anyone want to ask a question? Please, in the back there. Thank you.
Thank you. I was just wondering, I don't want to be pessimistic, but you already outlined some of the challenges here. So considering that it might be, arena for cooperation and trying to integrate a cross-sectoral approach, maybe that is what this BBNJ agreement can maybe provide. But from the panelists, I would be curious. Seabed, we heard that might be very limited in terms of really claims that stretch into the current area in the Central Arctic Ocean, might be not that relevant in the Arctic, and fisheries might be a bit difficult or not even relevant at the moment. So which kind of pillars do you see are the most relevant in the next 20, 30 years, where the BBNJ negotiations or agreement can really make a change in the Arctic?
I think that's a really good question, and I invite the panelists who were in the first part also to respond if any of them wish. But here, Alfaken.
Yeah, certainly, it's a good question and an important issue, and. But if you look at the Central Arctic Ocean, there is really not much human activity. So I would look other places in order to find the places where there is a really substantial need for more coordination. And in that respect, it's also important to remember that implementation is not about pushing a button and then the treaty is implemented. It's an ongoing work. The Law of the Sea Convention was adopted in 1982. We are still struggling with the implementation. So this is an ongoing thing. It will never be finished. Thank you.
Very good. Vito, please.
Just a quick thing about deep sea mining, that regardless of the fact that deep sea mining will be regulated by coastal states that will have entitlements on the continental shelf, even the extended continental shelf, part of it, even in the Norwegian plans, were located under the high seas. So then there will be a transboundary relationship between the activities and the impact, and the BBNG agreement would have some measure of impact, just to put that, yeah.
Anyone else?
I'll make a small comment on that one.
Yeah, please. Thank you, Vicky.
So I totally agree with you. There's nothing happening up in the Central Arctic Ocean right now. We thankfully have that ice lid over it all. But in that sense, I would argue that it makes it even more imperative and possibly, if you're in an optimistic mood, easier to set aside some MPCAs because you're not stopping anybody. It's already been stopped, right? Again, it's kind of doing the CAUFA precautionary approach. Before even anything happens, then we can set it off. We can set it aside, right? And again, if it's informed by the ecological integrity, that information, and to be able to say, you know, this would be a good place to designate as a PSSA under IMO, or have it included as a VME within the CAUFA, or whatever it might be, that again, it might be easier to do it now before people are actually going in and before it's even possible.
Well, thank you very much. I think we've learned a lot, and I want to thank all of the panelists for their hard work and their responses today. So thank you all.